Welcome back to Call Me By Your Game, the podcast where I, your host Connor McCabe, bring on a guest to hear from them about a meaningful or memorable video game from a particular moment in their life. On the show, we talk as much about what made playing the game that they bring on special, and we'll also get into the context from their life and how and when this game made its impact. It's a show about what makes video games special to different people. A little bit of housekeeping up top is that anything that my guest or I share today or plug wherever you're listening or watching, you'll be able to scroll down and find those beautiful links in the show notes. So whether you're watching on YouTube or listening in your favorite podcast catcher, if you scroll down and you want to find, a podcast that maybe the guest promotes today, or like a link to social media, if you scroll down, it's going to be nice and neatly organized for you to find below. That'll do it for the housekeeping, and I'll finally introduce our guest for today's episode. Please welcome video editor and contributor at MinnMax, Charles Harte.
Hello. What's going on?
So many things. I know we're on. We're let's just say we're in different time zones. So just such different points in our day. And I'm starting the day with a nice little morning podcast. So I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing, Charles?
That's good. I'm a little sick. But
other than
that, I'm fine. I think I just adopted a dog, and my sinuses have been congested for the past 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I didn't think it was related to the dog, but it has been going on so long now. I'm like, I might be a little bit allergic to this dog, and it's not debilitating, but.
Inconvenient, perhaps.
An inconvenient truth, Al Gore would say. But yes. that's where I'm at in my day.
Oh man, I'm sorry. Well, an additional thanks, I guess, then for toughing it out and coming on the show. I'm someone who has allergies, like a lot of us do, and so it kind of feels like I'm always always have a little cold, and I've had a cat for 4.5 years, and I know it's not her, but because we're in such close quarters here, I always wonder. She sneezes from time to time, occasionally, and I'm like, is she allergic to me? Is there something that I should be checking out here? So
is there something of, if you spend enough time in close quarters with another living thing, do you just become allergic to them? A thing of I don't know, I want to spend less time with you.
It's either that or we're just becoming one person for some reason. Yeah. So maybe it's out of solidarity she sneezes for me. Well, Charles, so glad to have you on the show. Let's learn a little bit about you. I know you as a contributor at the MinnMax podcast. You've been on the show more regularly this year, and you're someone who truly one of the big reasons I love that show is that I like the people on the show. Turns out that makes a show far more listenable and enjoyable, and it's also one of the best video game podcasts out there.
Oh, shucks.
So hey, you know what? So I've been following you for a little bit this year, and just love what you have to contribute, both what you have to say on the show, but also just your general vibe. I also know that you've worked in video game journalism for a little while. You're a video editor, but what do you want to share with the listener about yourself? Is there anything you want to plug while you're here today?
Yeah. Nice to meet you. I'm Charles. I think I'm probably most known for when I was at Game Informer, which has since died. Rest in peace.
Yeah, R.I.P.
But in the wake of that, I've been doing more stuff at MinnMax, which is very nice. Very cool people over there. I edit videos. I do a lot of, we do these highlight reels throughout the year that I edit together and then kind of host. And then I've been going on trips. I guess the one specific thing I plug is they flew me out to the Grand Canyon to play Microsoft Flight Simulator, and I did a travelogue about it. And gosh, it was weird. It was very cool, very weird. And I don't want to give a spoiler, but it's definitely worth watching.
Yes, if the listener out there hasn't heard that story, because I remember it very specifically. I don't know what episode it was recently on the MinnMax show, but you gotta go hear it. But you're also referencing the travelogue you made.
Yes, which is a separate video. But yeah, the episode of the MinnMax show, the title something like "Game So Good You'll Puke" or something like it. It alludes to this Grand Canyon trip.
Yes.
Also, I don't know if you heard. So Alan Hartman, who's one of the people I encountered on this trip. Is the head of Xbox Game Studios. announced today he is stepping down in November. And
I totally missed that this morning.
And I don't think it was my fault, but I also don't think it had nothing to do with me. I don't know why I'm being so cagey about it. I threw up on a helicopter tour of the Grand Canyon. I don't need to not spoil it. If you weren't going to listen to it, you weren't going to listen to it, but now maybe you will. I threw up in the helicopter in front of Alan Hartman and then some other big wigs at Xbox.
So good.
And now he's like, I can never do this job ever again. He had it for a year.
Perhaps it was just the puke that broke the camel's back, I guess.
Sure.
In a way.
So
not
puke
like
in that
the
camel's
reason,
back.
but, it was like, okay, this is just adding to the pile.
Yeah, definitely. People get camel sick a lot.
Yeah, big time.
But yeah, that, and then I also have been contributing over at the Indie Informer, which is a small little indie game site. So you can go read my work and all of our work at indieinformer.com.
Yeah, the Indie Informer rules too. I know that Jill Grote is a big part of that operation over there. Can you remind me who else contributes?
It's like her thing.
Okay, yes.
And then I know John Carson would write there a bunch. He was a former Game Informer also. I don't think he has recently. But then post Game Informer shutting down, she brought on myself, Marcus Stewart, and Wesley LeBlanc. So 3 people that were at Game Informer.
Yes.
We now kind of have a permanent freelance position there of if there's ever a thing where it's we want to write this or we want to do whatever, if it fits in the budget, then they'll make room for it and stuff.
Okay, cool. That's great. Cool. Yeah, I love that operation over there. So I'm glad to see that you're contributing as well. It's only going to make it even better.
I hope so.
Yeah, hey, fingers crossed. We don't need another helicopter situation on our hands. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself. I'm so excited to talk to you a little bit about your general history with gaming to start the show. But before we do, will you introduce the game you brought on for the main event later and call me by your game?
The game I have brought today, which is also a favorite of Jill Grote's, is Tunic.
Can't wait. We'll get into it, but this is a game that I've just been staring at for about 2 years and shamefully not starting, so I'm pumped to at least know that somebody else loved it and gave it its due. But let's get into your general history, Charles. What are some of your earliest memories of video games, whether they are you playing or even watching someone?
I don't know the exact first time. I remember ever since I was very little, seeing other people I remember my cousin had a Game Boy and he had Link to the Past for the Game Boy, and there's at the very start of Link to the Past you have to use a lantern to burn a certain piece of grass to get into a little hidden thing behind the castle.
Yes.
And as an adult, very clear, very obvious to do. This kid spent 10 hours playing A Link to the Past and never knew how to get in this one piece of grass, which is amazing. But the first time clear memory I have is it was around the holidays, and I was at some relative's house, and a bunch of kids that were older cousins, second or whatever. I was a big, up in New York we have a big family, then I don't know all of them. Sitting around a table, TV, playing Lego Star Wars, the original Lego Star Wars.
Wow.
And I really liked Legos, and I really liked Star Wars. So this was just the greatest thing in the whole world to me. And I didn't even get to play, but I just remember being transfixed by it.
Yes.
And then that Christmas, a bunch of my dad's friends pooled together and got us a copy of Lego Star Wars for the PC. So we didn't have any gaming consoles. And I think my dad had to go buy a new graphics card because we didn't have a PC for gaming at all.
Yes.
And I was 5. My brother was 3. And you can play Lego Star Wars co-op on the keyboard, and just each person uses a different half of the keyboard.
Wow.
And so we played so much Lego Star Wars for a full year. That was the only video game I properly had. And then the next year Lego Star Wars 2 came out. And then the year after that I finally got a Nintendo DS.
Okay, gotcha.
So that was the proper entry into video games.
Yes.
Lego Star Wars was very foundational part of my gaming experience. Honestly, we got the DS because Lego Star Wars: The Complete Saga wasn't coming to PC at launch. I now remember it. So it was specifically Lego Star Wars.
Yes, that was your hook. And for it almost feels like, I know this probably wasn't the case, but for the longest time you're like, that is what video games are?
Oh,
is
definitely.
Lego Star Wars?
Yeah. Well, and it couldn't get any better than that. And all of my video game ambitions were Lego Star Wars related. Of like, I had a friend who had a PlayStation 2, and he had Lego Star Wars on the PlayStation 2. And on the PlayStation 2, there are analog sticks.
Yes.
As opposed to just the arrow keys. So you could make the characters walk. And for some reason, that was the coolest thing to me. I was like, oh my god. Imagine how cool I would be if I was like Obi-Wan walking through the Mos Eisley Cantina. I would feel like such a badass. And yeah, eventually, once I got my DS, I mean,
the world
Lego
sort of
Star Wars
opened up from there.
Yeah, I got really into Pokemon.
Okay.
Big Pokemon kid. I have a memory of being in 6th grade and being in like an English class and just literally having a thought in my head of like, all I ever want to do is play Pokemon. I think the reason I'm alive is to play Pokemon. Like the reason I do, the way you have a guy that goes and he does his 9 to 5 at the tire factory or whatever.
Yes.
He's like, I get to go home and have dinner with my kids. That was how I felt about my Bulbasaur and Pokemon Leaf Green, where I was like, I'm going to go home and he's going to learn Razor Leaf soon and everything's going to be okay.
That's so great. So your introduction, first of all, I love that. It's just like, this is my passion and my life's calling from now on. It sounded like you maybe started with like Leaf Green, the Game Boy Advance games, in playing it on the DS?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
I got a Game Boy like years later, just for the novelty of it. But I put the GBA games in the bottom of the DS. Leaf Green was my first one, and then I spent a lot of time in Gen 4 with like Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm trying to think of, and then I think the next Christmas after that, I got a Wii. Very Christmas based, getting consoles in my family.
I mean, as a kid, like that's one of, like, especially if your family celebrates Christmas, that is one of likely few opportunities you have to like get a console gifted to you. So that makes sense.
Yes.
Maybe even the Wii that I see behind you.
Yes, maybe. I am in a house with my partner now, so it might be her Wii, but I think it's my Wii.
Gotcha.
But yes, probably that one. I never thought about that.
Yeah. Okay. Here comes a custody battle for the Wii.
Yeah.
That's great though. I love hearing that. It's fun how like sometimes for all walks of gamer, like gaming can start with such a, I don't want to say like a narrow avenue, but like almost like a limited like sort of basket of experiences, and then slowly for some people it will expand out. For other people it's kind of like, well, Lego Star Wars is my one thing, but it sounds like for you, slowly but surely things started to open up a little bit.
Yeah, and I also want to mention of the like early era, it was always like with my brother. That was like a very core video thing. My brother's 2 years younger than me, but we're very close. So we played Lego Star Wars together. Eventually it was like, there's a Lego Batman. I can't think of anything cooler than that. Lego Batman 2, there's an open world Gotham City, and I probably have, to be clear, it's open world Gotham City in that it is Gotham City. There isn't like a lot of stuff to do.
Yes. We're not talking like Arkham City just put into Lego form.
Yeah, basically. And my brother and I were so obsessed with it. We were like 12 and 10, I think, when that game was out. And we would just like play tag in Lego Batman, or we would play hide and seek, where you'd have to like, you'd put your character somewhere, it was split screen, and someone would look away, and then you'd angle the camera so that it was like really hard to tell where you were, and then the other player would have to find you on their screen. And
I
like,
love that.
I think back on that a lot in the way of like, sometimes kids just want, you'll find a way to play if you give them like the toys, and to us Lego Batman 2 was more of a toy than a video game, if that makes any sense. Like, it's just the space to do stuff in. It
makes so much sense. I think genuinely on like episode 2 or 3 of this show, my friend came on to discuss the original Jack and Daxter, and he said that him, I think, and his younger brother would would, and I quote, make movies in Jak and Daxter, where they would essentially just be role-playing in the world, but not actually playing the game. So this sounds like, another offshoot of that sort of like, just like living in the world and playing with it, as you said, as a toy.
Yeah. I love there was definitely a lot of like young role play moments as kids that I didn't even realize that's what we were doing until I like had a word for it later. Another game I got really into, this was like older, like high school, even into now. I don't know if you've ever played the game Gang Beasts.
Yes, I think, is this one you threw out as an option
I think so.
For your main event? Okay, yes. I'm familiar with it.
It's it's a physics-based fighting game. You play a bunch of like floppy dudes that kind of look like they're made out of clay. It is not a game that feels like it was designed to be played for very long. Like, to say, if I ask someone, do you play Gang Beasts? They're like, I have played Gang Beasts. I played it for a few hours a few years ago, and it was fun. My brother and I have played that game so much. We have such a mastery of the physics and controls of that game, and we have all these characters that we've created in this like lore of the game. And it's probably the only video game in the world I can emphatically say I'm very good at that video game.
Yes.
As much as I like games, I don't always feel like I'm good at them. I can kick anyone's ass in Gang Beasts. Not that will ever be an important thing I need to do in my life.
Yes, if we ever need, like, if, for the Monstars from Space Jam come back and they're like, we're playing Gang Beasts to decide the fate of humanity, I think we're going to call upon you.
I'm the LeBron James of Gang Beasts.
Yes, 100%. That's so great. That game, one I haven't touched, unfortunately, reminds me of, because it's kind of it's like a fighting, sort of like a fighting brawler. Is that how you described it?
Yeah, I mean, it's you load up the game and there's like a few modes, but the main one you would just do is you drop in on a map and everything is loosely put together and you just throw like silly punches until someone falls off the cliff and then you win.
Yes. There's something about games like that. It's also reminds me a bit of what I found really fun in Fall Guys was that the thing that can level a playing field is how it feels like you're controlling a drunk toddler as you're trying to go through an obstacle course, or in your case, punch someone. So it almost feels like it's accessible to other people, but it almost gives me a sense of fun and freedom when playing, so I'm not as precious about, I've got to win, or I really want to do well. It's more the fun can be in the goofiness of it. Does that feel true to you for that game?
Yeah, well, because when you lose, your character just gets punched in the face and flips. He does a complete 360 in the air, and it looks stupid and hilarious every time. And I think what we like about Gang Beasts so much is you can go from being a drunk toddler to learning how to do like a backflip into a drop kick. And the fact that we can make our toddlers fight like that is just incredibly entertaining. It's also I'll use this segue into another part of my gaming history. I like Dungeons and Dragons a lot. And this is like a much more recent thing for me. This is the past like 5 or 6 years. But there's something about Gang Beasts where no matter how good you are at it, there is some element of randomness in the physics where I can go for a move I've done a million times and it might or might not work. And the fact that it might not work means when it does work, it feels crazy. It feels awesome. And that's how I feel about Dungeons and Dragons, which is a game based a lot on like the whims of the dice and how well you roll and how things go. Of the fact that anything at any point could go horribly wrong means that when things go right, it's like the best feeling in the world. Yeah,
like, and as someone, we were kind of talking before the show, I've only dipped a mere toenail into D&D or D&D, I guess tabletop role-playing games, is that, when you, like, have, I don't know, your character has, like, an expert level attribute in something, but you can still roll a 1 and fail, and or vice versa, having a terrible attribute but rolling a really high number and succeeding. I think it's just getting to your point that you're making.
Yeah. Well, and then it becomes a thing of what I like about it, and this honestly ties into Tunic a little bit when we eventually get to it, but I think a lot about stories broadly as like a DM of D&D, but then also just in my general life. And like stories exist as a way for humans to contextualize the things that have happened in their lives into something that is digestible. Of like, this horrible thing happened. I threw up on a helicopter in front of this Xbox executive, but it became a story because of the way I can twist it in my brain and present it as like a funny anecdote.
Yes.
And what I like about D&D is that, like, despite me being like an expert athlete and then I roll a 1 and I fail the athletics thing, that is the story. Like, story happens no matter which way it goes. And I find it so interesting to be like, okay, you're Usain Bolt. It's the final match of the Olympics and you rolled a nat 1. Now we decide what happens to make that a nat 1. Did he trip? That seems unlikely. Is he emotionally broken up about something? Has he decided, I don't need the medals, I just want to, love my wife? I don't know. There's just so much there that I find like so compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. And that's cool to hear how that has, I guess been such a part of your enjoyment of story, but like kind of in this context, games themselves that's something I have a friend who is playing, speaking of Pokemon, playing through the original Pokemon games right now, because we did this is a shameless plug for the network, but we have a games club that we do every quarter. We cover one game in like a book club format, and we covered the Gen 1 Pokemon last year at some point, but because that's releasing on a public feed now, we have people who are like playing those games and for the first time and checking in with us on them. And so one of the things I think I love, it's a long road for me to get to, one of the things I love about the early Pokemon games are how much you fill in with your imagination. And I think it's just kind of circling the same idea that you're talking about that can be really fun. It's kind of like what I liked about, I think, reading books growing up, like imagining. I remember being in 3rd grade and reading the original Harry Potter, and I'm imagining Hogwarts like the way my school is laid out. Which makes no sense because it was a single story school, but anyway, that imagination and filling in the context is great. Sorry to sort of just take that segment over.
I think that's the exact spirit I like about it, is like, I like video games and the way they can like direct imagination, but there's also something so innate about like being creative and imagining that, like, even with Gen 1 Pokemon, like you can make it whatever you want it to be. Like, it connects with so many people because there's enough of the foundation there that people are like, yeah, I'll run with this however I want to. Yeah,
absolutely. I could talk about that sort of subject and even specific stories for a long time. So wait, when did you, because how long has Gang Beasts been out? I'm kind of getting us back to the history portion, because it only came into my vision in the last like 4 years.
It's been around in various states of being for a long time. I first learned about it in like 2014. And I think it was like in early access, and I think it came to consoles in like 2017 or 18.
Yes.
So I had it like on my like shitty laptop.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
we would connect our Xbox 360's controllers to it to play on there.
Nice.
And I remember getting, really with the PS4, but it happened again with the PS5. Of the first thing we did was like buy Gang Beasts and booted it up. We're like, oh my gosh, this runs so much better than my awful PC. And then going from PS4 to PS5, and it now having Gang Beasts is, as much as I love it, I think objectively not a very great game. I don't think it's like foundation is built very well. It doesn't get a ton of regular support. Not that I'm like faulting the developers on it or anything. But it was a thing where now I have the PS5 and I was like, finally, it runs as smoothly as I've always wanted it to.
Yes.
This is the perfect machine.
That's so great. Well, speaking of, consoles, you were talking about how, and we don't have to hit, like every highlight of your life, because it sounds like, and just by if you're watching on YouTube, the images behind you of some amiibo and just like a whole row of Wii games, I think we could probably talk about your history for a 10-part podcast. But I would like to know, outside of like and maybe the Wii was this for you, feel free to jump in. Was there a console where you were like, this is my console, where you finally not just felt ownership over it, but were actively seeking out games?
Yeah, I think it was my DS.
Okay.
Because it was I mentioned I was always playing stuff with my brother, and the DS had like multiplayer functionalities, but it was the first time that games became like my personal thing. Like, we each had our own DS.
Yes.
If I was playing Pokemon, they were my Pokemon. It wasn't a thing we were doing together. So that was a specific thing I have a lot of nostalgia for, of like bringing it on road trips, and DS download play I think about a lot. Is like, it was a thing where even if you didn't have the game, you could connect with DS download play, and like if someone else had Mario Kart, you could also play Mario Kart. You just had to be Shy Guy.
Yes.
And I often wish like the Switch or like other modern handhelds had a version of that, because I always enjoyed that as a concept. Like Picto Chat, just like a weird thing where you can a great example of like, it's just a toy, and I've spent so many hours on Picto Chat with like other kids, just like drawing stuff with the DS.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think the DS, I think the Wii was also important, but the Wii was I was a kid in an era where the odds of anyone having a Wii in their house was like 60 to 70%. Like, if someone was a kid my age, they had a Wii and they had Mario Kart and they had Wii Sports.
Yep.
So it was a thing that I very much liked, but that's when I have more ownership over like games and stuff, whereas the DS was like, that was my console.
Okay, great. I love hearing that. It also just like gives me like, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the console that is that for a person can give you a really good idea of like context of like when they grew up and whatnot. Just hearing that, you know, the DS and the Wii were significant and at that age for you. That's cool.
Yeah, I was born in 2000.
Okay, there we go.
So I had a DS, I was 7 years old on Christmas when I got that. And then I got the Wii the year later. And it's a funny thing of like being an adult now, and like the era of the Wii is past. But I often find myself getting like weirdly defensive about touch controls and motion controls.
Yeah.
People are like, oh yeah, you know, Phantom Hourglass was fine, but it had those awful touch controls. I'm like, actually touch controls were pretty cool, actually, if you were a kid. Or it was pretty cool in Force Unleashed when you could swing the Wii remote and then he swung his lightsaber at the same time. Like, oh man.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, like I have some heavy nostalgia for that era of the unusual way that Nintendo was offering their games to be played. Because, I mean, sure, there are plenty of examples of how that was clunky or didn't work great, but then there are plenty of examples as well of it being some of the most creative stuff I feel like I've ever seen in gaming that I really miss. I think part of the, like, which is why many people are, I think, like, hopeful for a second screen functionality on this unreleased Switch 2, which I think is probably unrealistic as much as I'd love it. Yeah, it's great stuff. As someone who has seemingly been gaming for a significant portion of their life and continues to do so today, have you ever had what I'd like to describe as a dark period in gaming, where it's maybe like the most you've ever been in a desert where you have either not been playing games very much, and that it could be for you a time where you just weren't, or for you, I think compared to the rest of your life was less, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would probably be in my earlier years of high school, just because it got to be a point where I was so busy. Especially I was like a band kid. I think I don't know if it'll be on the camera. I have two trombones behind me in the cases on the floor. And marching band was just a lot of hours of the day, and then I was also just taking a bunch of like really hard classes. And there's a distinct shift for me between my sophomore year to my junior year, where I was like, I think the pace I put myself on is unsustainable. I want to take a step back from all these super hard academics. And then taking easier classes and in turn playing more video games and then like ultimately becoming a happier person.
Yeah. An early example of like work-life balance for you almost.
Definitely. No, that's there's a whole like mental health background of that era, but that was definitely an early part where I was like video games in the way that where I was like in 6th grade, I was like video games are my reason to live. At that point in my life being like it's important to me to have this for like my soul, to have an outlet for me to just relax and turn my brain off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I've gone through periods of that for myself where I think it was also kind of like high school through college where I was really just getting a couple hits a year that I would play. Mm-hmm. I'm a big Zelda fan, so it was like, of course I'm playing Skyward Sword when it comes out, but that might be the only new Wii title I play for 2 years or something like that. Right. Yeah. Anyway, I was just kind of curious. And then I think just a couple more questions for you. One is there a game, kind of catching us up to more present day, that you've been playing recently that has really stuck out to you?
Yes. Which one to pull from? Literally today I was playing Echoes of Wisdom, new Zelda game, which is very good. We'll talk about that one. I like it a lot in a way that Zelda games, and you've played all of them, right? You did one of your video game clubs on Zelda games, right?
We did, yeah. I've missed. I'll say, speaking of the DS, I have both of the DS games, but I've never played those or Zelda 2. But I'm for the most part.
That's fine. I like Spirit Tracks, but yeah. Anyways, one of the things that I was getting when playing Echoes of Wisdom is it's this feeling of that is kind of it's let me get my thoughts in order here. Yes. It's an interesting that it's a 2D Zelda game, kind of, because there's 3D elements involved. Yeah. But it's the first like mainline 2D game post Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom where you can see that influence come into this world where usually it's going in the opposite direction because so many of the 2D games came before the major 3D games. And the fact that you have like this ecosystem, which if you're not familiar with the game, you can, most objects and enemies in the game, you can basically scan and just replicate copies of at will. So if you see a bed, you can just make a bunch of beds. Or if you see keys, which is like little bat enemies, you can just make a bunch of keys to fight enemies for you. It's so cool, but also cool in a way where it feels sometimes like you're breaking the game. Like, oh, I found the best one. I'm going to use that all the time. And my point in understanding games now being, oh, the developers knew that it would feel that way. And they did that on purpose. And I think as a kid, having the feeling of like, hey, I'm so smart, I outsmarted the system, I found the best thing, and developers being like, we want everyone to feel like they outsmarted the system and found the best thing, and allowing that, I think it's just like a really cool way that to play the game and just a cool relationship to have with the game I haven't felt in a while.
Yeah, I've been playing that a little bit too. I'm only a couple hours in, I think, about to enter my first big dungeon. And I completely agree. I think I've heard some what I think is very fair criticism of like the clunkiness of like accessing your echoes and whatnot. Of course, I think that's totally fair, but I'm with you too, where I'm pleasantly surprised at how they have brought in some of the creativity and ingenuity from the newer 3D games into this. In fact, talking to a friend about it, I had only played for an hour. I was like, Patrick, they did it. They pulled it off. So I'm glad to hear you're liking that. How deep are you into that game? Do you know?
I believe just at the pacing of the game, I think I'm on like the last dungeon before like the final stretch.
Okay,
so I'm pretty deep in.
Awesome.
And yeah, the menu clunkiness only gets worse as you get more echoes because I'm at the point where now I have like dozens of echoes and it's faster to pause the game and go into like your compendium of stuff than it is to use the shortcuts sometimes.
Gotcha.
But yes, and I also like the visual designs like coming in from the 3D games of you have like Zoras, which in 3D and 2D have always looked different. Like both versions are present in this game, and they have like a political rivalry basically. And I just even like the blue hood that Link has in Breath of the Wild being like what Zelda wears for a lot of the game. So yeah, really cool. Really like that game.
That's great. Last couple questions for you. The first of which is there a game that is either about to come out or that you just have not gotten to yet that you are really excited to dive into?
I really want to play I'm gonna say Dragon Age the Veilguard.
Okay, yeah.
Comes out at the end of October. I am not a Dragon Age person. I've never played a Dragon Age game, and I saw a preview of this. I was at Summer Game Fest and got like a behind closed door, like hands off preview. I watched someone play it, and I was like, this is the coolest game ever. I don't know why I never played this. I only have more interest in like the fantasy genre after becoming interested in Dungeons and Dragons as like an older kid. But just something about just really getting to sink my teeth into one of these like dozens of hours long fantasy RPGs. I was really into the way it starts out and you have a party of characters already and you're talking to them as if like you've gone on adventures and you're in the middle of a mission gone wrong. And I think probably my least favorite part of a lot of RPGs is like the slow build up to like actually assemble all the characters. And I just really liked how like in media res this was of like you start out, you get going, and I'm like, that's what I want. I want to be a cool fantasy party. Yeah,
and that's coming up pretty soon. Is that Halloween?
I think it's Halloween, yeah.
Yeah, we've got one person that we do a lot of shows with. Shout out to Roxy Polk, who is a huge BioWare fan in general, but has been streaming, I think, as much of the series as she can, and she is so hyped for this. So I hope that if you dive in, it's a lot of fun for you too. The last question I have for you before we head to the break is there a game that you would be so disappointed in yourself for not bringing up from your history, whether it's like a niche one or just another meaningful game?
I think the other meaningful game I would bring up is Kid Icarus Uprising.
Oh, yeah.
This is a 3DS game where you play as Pit, who a lot of people probably just know from Smash Bros. Yep. But there was like old Kid Icarus games, I think both on the NES.
I think so. There may be a Game Boy one too, I want to say.
Yeah, you're right, yeah. And basically when they put Pit in Smash Bros, the director of Smash Bros was like, all right, this is what he's going to look like, and we'll give him this stage and stuff. And then for Sakurai's next game, he made a Kid Icarus game, and it's like a third-person shooter / melee game. And it's so good. The writing is so good. It's probably the most in desperately need of a port game I've ever played. Because it's got this janky control scheme on the 3DS. But if it was on Switch as like when you have a proper left stick and right stick, I think so many people would love this game. It would be an instant cult classic, but it's like stuck on a bad control scheme.
Yeah, that's one that I feel like I hear all the time, people lamenting the fact that it feels like it will never come, like it's just going to die on the 3DS. And sadly, one I don't have for the 3DS, so I don't know when I'll ever play it, but I'm glad to hear, like, to meet one of the, 25 people who played it. That's great.
Yeah, that was a big... I remember getting that for my 12th birthday, and I specifically wanted it because there was some, like, Nintendo ad channel on the Wii. I don't remember what it was, but I learned of it because I was on the Wii and watching whatever these, like, demos they had were, and thinking, like, this is going to be the next big thing. And then I really liked it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well... Thanks for sharing about Kid Icarus Uprising, and then, Charles, just the rest of your history with gaming. Like I said, I think we could have done this for a long time, but I appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and just head to a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll finally get into all things Tunic, so I'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to Call Me by Your Game, of course. Connor McCabe still here with Charles Harte to get into our Tunic discussion. Charles, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back.
You're so welcome. Like I was saying to you before the show, we're going to set the table for the listener right now on what Tunic is. So I'm basically just going to be sharing some very basic history and context about the game. And if you want to jump in, please do. All right. Without further ado, here we go. Tunic is a 2022 action-adventure game developed by Isometric Corp Games and published by Finji. It's set in a ruined fantasy world where the player controls a little fox on a journey to free a fox spirit trapped in a crystal. The player discovers the gameplay and setting by exploring and finding in-game pages of a manual that offer clues, drawings, and notes. The backstory is obscured. Most text is given in a constructed writing system, as it's described, that the player is not expected to decipher, and Tunic's isometric perspective hides numerous pathways and secrets. To contextualize that a little bit, I feel like this game is, this is probably going to be a huge part of this discussion today, and not in talking about the game's influence, this game was known for being a really cool adventure that's a bit obscure, that doesn't really hold your hand too much, or at all, really. Does that feel like a fair contextualization of kind of what this game feels like?
Yeah, I think my quickest pitch would be it's top-down Zelda meets Dark Souls.
Yes.
It is. I mean, the little fox is wearing a tunic, much like Link wears in every Zelda game.
Yeah.
But both in the combat and then also in the way information is presented to you, it's very Dark Souls in that, like, there is a story going on, but you kind of have to be paying attention to get it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. That was some very helpful clarification. Little additional context is that designer Andrew Schuldice was the main developer of Tunic, which is his first major game. He did this over 7 years. He began work on it as a solo project in 2015, wanting to combine challenging gameplay with gentle visual and audio design. He was inspired by his childhood experiences playing on the NES, with, of course, games like the original Legend of Zelda, and remembered trying to understand game manuals for which he lacked context. Schuldice was joined during development by composers Terrence Lee and Janice Kwan, audio designer Kevin Regami, and developer Eric Billingsley, and producer Felix Kramer, and publisher Finji joined the project in 2017, which is the same year the game was announced at E3. Tunic was released for Mac, Windows, Xbox, followed by, this was in March 2022, followed by ports for the Switch and the PlayStation consoles later that September, and it received glowing reviews, especially for its aesthetics, design, and gameplay, but drew a little bit of criticism for what has been described as uneven difficulty, and for players to feel stuck, which is kind of funny, because considering the context of the game, it's like, based on its influences, that seems to be expected, and it won many awards in 2022 when it came out. It's one of these games, to get back into contextualizing a little bit, that as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, that's for me, and yet here I am, still having never touched it. Charles, before we get into your history with it, are there any additional contextual points you think we should include about the game itself?
I believe it launched on Game Pass. I don't think I own it. I think I played it on Game Pass when it came out. And I think that's basically it. I think an important thing that was listed in your thing, it does have a made up language, but you don't have to understand it. But if you sat down with a pen and paper and like really thought about it and did a bunch of puzzle solving, it does exist and people have decoded it.
Wow.
But I know there's people that haven't touched the game because they're like, I don't want to have to understand a made up language. And it's like, you don't have to. You can fully play the game without it.
Yes.
But there are some things where like you'll see a symbol next to another symbol enough times, you're like, oh, that probably means fire or something like that.
Yeah.
But yes.
It sounds reminiscent of me playing a Japanese copy of Pokemon Yellow as a kid and being like, I think this is Thundershock based on context clues and whatnot.
That's like exactly what it feels like, which is very cool in the context of the game.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you for helping me, do a little table setting there. Let's get into your time with it. Do you remember how you discovered this game in the first place?
It must have been E3. I don't remember seeing it for the first time, but I always am paying attention to E3 for the past at least decade, probably longer. And I remember, there's a lot of indie games that'll come up at those showcases that you kind of have to remember to keep tabs on, because they'll just come out and you'll miss it, or it'll be years and you're like, where did that game go? And then you're like, oh, they're still developing it. Okay, that's good that I've checked it. And so I remember seeing it, and the aesthetic was what got me. It's like a cute little fox in this, it's an isometric view, but I don't really know how to describe the art style. It's like a very smooth but still kind of like polygon-esque version of the art. Like if you could make a PlayStation 1 game, preserve all the shapes but then update the textures to look really nice, is kind of what it looks like at times. So yeah, I was mainly drawn in for the aesthetic. I didn't really know anything about it, and then remember I kept keeping up with it. And then it was coming on Game Pass, so I was like, oh, I'll download it and check it out.
Totally. Did you do you remember if you ended up playing it pretty soon upon release, or was it a delay for you?
I think it was day one.
Okay.
Purely because the date in question why I chose this game is March 29th, 2022. So I don't know exactly what day in March it came out, but the fact that it came out in March and I beat it on the 29th means I probably was there the day it came out.
Okay, gotcha. Well, thinking about this game, I know you said one of the things that drew you in was the aesthetic design. What do you remember about the game itself that hooked you?
So it really was the language aspect, I think. So actually, it was the manual. I haven't talked enough about the manual in the game. So as you go through the game, you'll find little white pages, and it makes it so when you pause the game, you pull up what would be the physical manual for this game, and it's as if it's like an SNES manual or just a manual of any game back when they had manuals in them. But specifically an older game, because there was stuff back before they had as much text in games or as much room to fit exposition in games, where you would open up the manual and be like, oh, this is the context for what's going on. Like, you could open up the manual for the original Legend of Zelda and be like, oh, that's who Zelda is. I understand the context in which the game takes place now.
Yes.
And the manual is such a smart mechanic because, one, it's nostalgic. It just has this cool aesthetic to it, but it also reveals information in such an organic way that feels like I don't know, Connor, if you have any specific instances of your life of going and reading the manual and learning something new about the game, if that's a thing you felt before.
It's probably something that happened in earlier days of gaming for me, and I think a lot because I grew up. My first console was an NES, even though the SNES came out the year, I think, in Japan that I was born. I skipped it, so all I had were NES games, and I specifically think of Super Mario Brothers 2, USA, or, if there was any confusion. Probably didn't have to clarify that. That makes sense. And just finding out who Wart is, what's going on, who's Birdo, what world are we in, especially being a kid who had played the original to death. That is one that I think of. That, and we've talked about Pokemon so much on this episode, but I still have my original manuals, and I still love looking at those things, both from I remember them filling in context for me as a kid, despite being a text-heavy game, but also the art was a big thing too. I hope I answered your question. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was looking for. I have a memory of opening up the manual for I think Pokemon Leaf Green, and that being where it explains the difference between the attack stat and the special attack stat. Yes. Of how some types of moves go to the attack and then other types go to special attack, which once you're playing the game with a more understanding of what's going on, as many kids don't, you're like, oh, I'm gonna pick this Pokemon because these stats and these moves line up and this would make sense. Yeah. But that's there's instances of kind of fundamental mechanics that you would just have to mess around with to figure out.
so like one of the earliest instances in Tunic I remember is you pick up a page and it's like, oh, and as you know, if you hold the A button, this thing happens. And I was like, oh, I've never held the A button for 3 seconds consecutively. And you can do it from the beginning of the game. It's just once you find the manual, you then have the context. So speedruns of this game are really interesting because there's like abilities and stuff that you can do once you know what all the controls and all the context of things are. So I remember like the first thing finding out like, oh, I can hold down this button and it unlocks a whole new way for me to interact with the world. That feeling, like that level of epiphany is really, really cool.
That's great. So interesting. Yeah, because I wonder, I would assume for some player out there, there were elements like that maybe they discovered just through gameplay or organically. But once that is presented to you through one of these manual pages, I mean, I would assume that it maybe caused you to be like, what else is possible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one... this is a game where, because the information is so obscured, I specifically am avoiding talking about specifics because the fun of the game is finding out the specifics.
Yes.
But there is one that came like 2/3 of the way through the game where once I figured out what this manual had been telling me to do throughout all these pages, there's like a phrase that keeps coming up. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. And then realized like, oh my gosh, I could have done this whole time. And it's like, truly this new way. It's like you put on glasses for the first time.
Yes.
The way it like affects the game. And that on top of it is pretty difficult. It's not, I don't think I've ever beat a Souls-like game properly, but I get like pretty far in them. I don't know, 20 hours or so. And it is up there. It's got like, you know, you have very deliberate swings. You have a dodge roll. You've got a stamina meter you have to manage. And there is a feeling of beating a really hard boss, where you'd always see people doing it before you play Souls games. You're like, why would you do that? It's just really, really hard. Why wouldn't you play something that's easy? And then you beat the boss that you thought was impossible, and you're like, oh, I am God. I can kill anything. So that feeling plus the puzzle feeling is it's a bonkers combo of like unmatched euphoria in like the game playing experience.
That sounds so fantastic. I'm just salivating for it the more you talk about it, truly, because these are things that you're echoing that I've heard about the game since the release, really. And those two elements that you're talking about, I think, while they present an additional layer of challenge to the player, both I think the discovery element that you're discussing and then the combat challenge, because I've played games like this. I'm also not a Souls player. Famously, if you listen to this, people listen to the network, they'll know that the only one I've actually tried properly was Sekiro, and I had a demoralizing 2 hours with it, so I've never been back. But having played Souls-esque games like the Star Wars Jedi games and a few others, I would say that when you are able to really just like fight through and master and grow that discipline for combat, or make discoveries, it's just so satisfying. Like you're saying, I'm really just echoing what you said already.
Hey man, echoes of wisdom.
We're circling a few recurring themes in this episode. What were you gonna say? Sorry.
I was just gonna loop back. I'm sure if you've mentioned it before, people have told you before. Sekiro is the hardest one.
Yes.
It's not even close because it's the only one where there's no way around. Like, if you're up against a boss in Dark Souls and you're having a really hard time, you can grind and get different abilities up. Or, like, bosses often have, like, elemental weaknesses. Mm-hmm. Sekiro, it's like, nah, you gotta figure out how to parry that specific thing, and it does suck if you don't get it.
Yes, very much good, the game. I think it was the new one the year where I was like, I want to try this, and I think I had, like, gotten it for Christmas and still have just not gone back. And I always say, oh, I'd love to play Demon Souls someday or Bloodborne. But anyway, when you think about this game as well on this playthrough, you talked about a couple of really wonderful breakthroughs that you made while playing the game. Is there maybe like a section of the game or a detail that really stuck out to you the first time you played it? And I know we're trying to avoid spoilers, so as best as you can, if you want to try to answer that question.
I'll give a half answer and then I'll give a different answer that's not like there's a mechanic in the game that you have no way of knowing what it is.
Yes.
So the one I mentioned at first of like holding down a button, you could theoretically mess around with that and figure it out. There's one mechanic, it just has to click for you, and I completely understand why someone would be frustrated of like not knowing where to go because it is an obscured piece of information. But there's something about like being just the exact level of intelligence a game wants you to be, where you're just challenged enough but never demoralized from not getting it, that I happen to be hit my wavelength well enough. So that one, that ability where it feels like putting glasses for the first time was like really cool.
Yeah.
But like area visually wise, there is a fight against a boss called the Librarian, and it's this like you play a cute little fox guy, and in like the Zelda games, Link is that size and all the other humans are that size, but in this world there aren't other creatures. Like, you're not one of many foxes in the world as it like currently is. So when you encounter someone, it's like, oh, you come up to like their knees. This is like a huge imposing figure. This sword is like 3 times as long as you are. And I remember that was a fight. I like stayed up late until 2 a.m. I was like, one more time. And I beat it. And I was like, yes. That was like the combat equivalent that like really clicked it in for me.
That's must have felt so good beating that boss. It's funny, anytime a boss or something or an enemy in a game has like a sophisticated name like Librarian, I just know they're gonna just beat the hell out of me for a while.
And it's also a thing where so the game has the non-English language. There is written like English text in the game, but it doesn't come up very often. Like, most signs don't have English on them. And even the manual has some English, but it's mostly this other language. And it does feel like if you don't know Japanese, and then there's some English words in there, you're like, okay, I can pick out Mario or whatever, but I can't pick out the rest of these. Or what I imagine the developer was doing of, he was just a kid and he couldn't read very well. So he knew the word roll and he knew the word sword or something, but he didn't know all the words in between. So it's kind of like you trying to put stuff together. So when there is text in English, you know it's important. So when you come up to the top of this building and this huge figure turns around and it says the Librarian in the bottom corner of the screen, you're like, oh no, this is going to be a big deal. And it is. It's very
cool. That makes sense. Even hearing you talking about that, one of the most recent things you were just sharing about giving that possibly that feeling that the creator Andrew Schuldice had when playing the game. It's almost like he created a game that can like sort of give you that feeling of sort of discovery and unknown that you had maybe when we would have been playing games as a kid, except we're adults at this point.
Yeah, it's nostalgic in... It seemed nostalgic at first because they were like, oh, this is another Zelda. I like Zelda, and it looks like it. And then it became nostalgic in other ways of like, oh, I haven't felt like I learned something this big since I was a kid.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's great. We've gotten to talk so much about like this game itself, and we can continue to get details too. I want to start to dive into the context of your life when you played this game. As I always like to do, I would like to start with some scene painting of like you describing, if it was one place, and if not, that's fine, the room where you would have been playing Tunic.
Yes, okay. 2022, I was a senior in college. I had a 1-bedroom apartment, Cincinnati, Ohio. I went to the University of Cincinnati.
Oh, Bearcats, okay.
Yeah, oh, yeah. And it's like 5-minute walk from campus, very close. I had a shitty futon from Target that acted as my couch, but it's a thing where like once you sit on it 10 times, after that it kind of just feels like you're sitting on a bunch of springs with cloth on top of it. So it was like not comfortable. To my left, I had my desk with my I actually didn't have my computer yet. I guess just my MacBook would have been sitting there. I had a little table where I ate dinner and like a big window that took up the whole wall. To my right, it was like the world's smallest kitchen. There was an oven and I want to say 2 burners.
Okay.
And no counter space. So I had to go and buy like a little wooden cutting board side table basically
Yeah.
from IKEA to like put the toaster on. And I was playing this late at night. My partner, I think, was living with me at the time. So it was like super small, the two of us. And I had a cat, Lando. He was I still have him. So that was the vibe. It was really late at night. I had just the kitchen light on, which was just over the stove. That was like the ambient lighting that was just lighting the rest of the room.
Yes.
Probably had my headphones on, playing it on the Xbox One. And that was the two memories I have. One of them is like the most specific thing I'll talk about in a second.
Sure.
But that beating the librarian moment, I specifically remember it being late at night. Blinds were closed. It was just that light on, and I was like, "Let's lock in. Let's finish it." And I did. And I was like, "How could I ever go to sleep now? I've never been more awake in my life."
Yeah, I'm so wired.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's great. Thank you for setting the sort of mood for us. That really gives me a good feeling too, especially so knowing it's in Cincinnati. I guess in like March roughly, like could have been transitioning to springtime sort of, but it's the Midwest, so it could have been cold as hell.
Yeah, it never makes up its mind. I don't remember being cold, but I don't remember a whole lot about like my physical state at that point.
Your blood was just flowing from the intensity of the librarian battle.
Exactly.
Well, that's great. You, I think you had some additional context you wanted to share. There's plenty of questions I could ask too. But I think you had a second story you wanted to drop in.
Well, I had like I don't know if there's like a day I'm thinking of, which is why I picked this game. That's like the main event. So I can do that now if you want, or I don't know if that's like a different section.
That would be great. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I mentioned who I am, what my job is. I was a senior in college. I was majoring in a interdisciplinary major called Digital Media Collaborative.
Okay.
And it's kind of a major for like creative digital stuff, and they let you kind of pick and choose what you want to do. So I took a bunch of classes on writing. I have minors in creative writing and screenwriting. I took some film classes. I took a few game classes. I got like to be good friends with the video game professors at the school. I was very pick and choose, but the kind of flaw of the program in my eyes is it was a lot of theoretical stuff and you can pick your own things, but there wasn't a lot of like real practical classes of like, okay, I know how to think about movies and write about movie plots a lot, but we never had a like equipment class. Like there was never hey, let's take a boom mic out and film something outside, or here's this kind of camera that you're going to be using a lot.
Yeah, not really like production courses sort of thing. Yeah.
So it being March, I would graduate in April. I was in a weird in-between state where I was like, I'm about to graduate, but I have no idea what I'm going to do. I was kind of stressed because I didn't feel like I had any real practical life skills that I could build on to go somewhere.
Can I ask you a little bit about that too as we're going through this? Did you have like an idea of kind of what you wanted to do, or were you like, I like all this stuff and I'm not really sure where to direct myself?
So what I wanted to do, I wanted to be like a writer for something. I knew I liked writing enough. I wrote like a TV pilot in one of my classes, and I was like, this is the coolest thing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I was and still am into it, but it was a thing where I had just assumed going into college that by the end of it, I would have a clear path afterwards. Like after high school, it was like, well, college is the next step, and then from there, the new steps will present themselves to me. Yeah. And I just wasn't in a situation where that was happening, unless I, wanted to risk it all, move to like LA.
Yeah.
And that was a thing. I'm still with my partner now, but like we were just getting increasingly serious, and she was pretty clear that like she didn't want to move to LA. I didn't want to unseat her. So it was like a weird thing where I had, I don't know, a lot of turmoil.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a writer. I liked the idea of a lot of stuff. I think I just assumed I would get some weird like marketing job, and then that would be it. But in February, I had just followed Rebecca Valentine, who's a reporter for IGN.
Yeah.
And she retweeted a post for a website called Fanbyte that they were hiring an intern. Fanbyte, I think is still around, but it kind of exploded. Yes. I've only written for sites that have since died, basically. but I hadn't heard of it at the time, but it was truly on a whim. This was the only time I ever saw this advertised. And they let you do a video cover letter, which I was really excited about because I feel like cover letters are always stiff and boring. This is like a chance for me to really like show myself off. Totally. And I think if I had to describe my education, they were basically teaching me how to be like a YouTuber. Like I knew how to film. I did a lot of video editing. I took one graphic design class, which was like enough to do thumbnails.
Yes.
So now that it was like, oh, make a video. So I did a video cover letter. I ended it with a rap song. That was another thing. I always incorporated music into my stuff. And then I got like onto the second round, and they had us do like some writing tests. And they had us do a video edit and a news article. And I was like so nervous about I really wanted this.
Yes.
It like paid well. It was like the main thing. So I went above and beyond, and I made an extra video about the process of me writing the news article.
Whoa.
Which was like, I was basically like, here's a study of the way Fanbyte writes their news articles. I looked at the last 51. This is the average number of words. This is the average number of links. This is where they seem to be placed. So I did all that, but I still had no idea because it was me against like the entire internet, right?
Yes.
So I was nervous, but it was like, wouldn't it be so cool to be a video game writer? And realizing I kind of had all this stuff, like the stars were kind of aligning, but I had no idea. Jumping back to Tunic, the game, and I'll again, avoiding spoilers here, there are two endings to the game. One of them is a traditional boss fight. The other one is a elaborate hidden puzzle that the game is pretty cagey about, but if you figure out what it is and how to solve it, this is one where it's like you couldn't solve this without writing some stuff down and like getting a pen and paper out. So I had been like, I think I'm gonna do this. I want to figure out how to put all this stuff together. I had the pen and paper out, but you also have to you don't have to 100% the game, but you have to it's a big completionist ending. It's really involved, and I also wasn't even 100% sure that I had the right things that I was doing.
Sure.
So on this day, this fateful day, March 29th, it was my birthday. I was turning 22, my last birthday as a kid in education. And the puzzle's called the Golden Path. I have a vivid memory of I figured out the Golden Path, which was so cool. It was like the ultimate. In order to do it, you had to have figured out that other like eye-opening mechanic I mentioned. It is like the peak of Tunic's euphoria, like the fact that I had figured this out. It's also a thing. It has a lot of steps, and you don't know if you've done it correctly until all the steps are done. Yeah. So just like really sitting down and making sure you get it. And I did it, I got it, and then I checked my phone and I got an email that I got the Fanbyte internship.
Oh my gosh.
And it was like truly the day my life began.
I would have started crying if I were you. That'd be amazing.
I'm getting emotional talking about it. Yeah. It was a big day. And then I also got Elden Ring for that birthday, which I did like it and it was cool. Less important than those other two events. So it was a day where I felt like, both in the sense of the game and in the sense of my real life, I had finally put all these pieces together about like what I was supposed to be and where all these things were supposed to go. And much like the puzzle in Tunic, I just had to put in all these steps and hope that at the end of it something would work out. And it did work out. So now I'm here.
I love that so much, and it really is so poetically perfect for how all this aligned. No wonder you were like, I kind of think this is the one I want to talk about on the show. That's amazing. It's, I mean, like, whether they say like, art imitating life or vice versa, it feels like that's kind of happening. And at least in that moment for you, I like moments like that where, especially when you're a little uncertain about where are things going to head for me, how do I even get to a place I want to be, having at least like a glimpse of that working out, let alone a few really wonderful like thumbs ups of affirmation that you got that day, those I feel like are to a sports comparison. It's like hitting one good shot in golf after sucking all day. You're like, maybe I can do this, and I've kind of got the hope and just enough of a push to do so. Not to contextualize your life too much, but
no, yeah.
Well,
and it goes back to like what I was saying about, I just think about story a lot, and the whole thing of dice rolls of like, and I think this is why I think video games or just games in general are so powerful to me, is the Golden Path puzzle in Tunic was, I mean, revolutionary for me because it was a moment where I felt like I figured everything out. But the story of the moment isn't the Golden Path puzzle. It's everything else around it. And it's the fact that the story happened because they laid the pieces for it, but it's mine. Like, I feel like the story of Tunic is the story of me because of how it happened there.
Yes.
And like, you can write a movie or TV show or whatever, and everyone that watches it, they'll, take it in their brains, they'll have their own takes on it. Not saying everyone experiences the same thing, but they're experiencing the same product in the same manner. And this is an instance where it was like, because I did it on this day in this way, it is like permanently sealed itself as like one of the best. I would say this is probably the best day of my life. If I had to like pick a day. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love how, just like moments in our life can just feel that special and important, and you just have sort of a huge personal ownership over it because it is yours.
Yes.
That's so great. Like, I don't even, most of the time I'm like, I got follow-up questions about this. I guess the only thing I'll really ask you before we kind of get into some wrap-up moments have you revisited this game, or I know it's kind of a recent release, so I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't.
It's only been 2.5 years. I haven't played it again. I was just, before we did this podcast, I was watching the game developers react to some speedruns, because I was like, I want to get like a quick glimpse in how it works again. And there's like a bunch of cool, again, all these spoiler things, there's a bunch of cool things you can do if you are combining buttons and just doing things in interesting ways. But yeah, I haven't played it since then, and it's one of those games that like, I don't know if you've ever played the Outer Wilds, or if you're familiar with that game at all.
I haven't, but I
okay.
Go ahead, yes.
A similar thing of, once you know how to beat the game, there's not a lot stopping you from doing it again, because it is a like meta player knowledge as opposed to an in-game ability that you have. So it would be hard for me to revisit Tunic purely because I could maybe start it up and I don't know, I would just know how to do a bunch of stuff, and it just wouldn't hit the same. Like, I think it has to be like a decade from now that I like go back to it. Yeah,
that'd be a completely different experience. This sort of like phenomenon comes up every so often, but it is the type of game where if only you could sort of like Men in Black erase your memory and then revisit it again. And you know what? I don't think we want to do that, because this is like a wonderful day that you've described to us. But it's the type of experience or movie where you're like, when you do kind of know, I guess it'd just be seeing it from a different context would maybe be interesting. But
this was one where it happened to line up on the external circumstances made it a lot greater than if I, like Outer Wilds, when I did actually beat it, I was kind of stressed because I beat it like, I had to beat it before midnight when it was leaving Game Pass. It was also a Game Pass game. So I was really like trying to cram my way through it. That's one, if I could erase it and do it again, I would do that.
Yes.
But yeah.
That's great. Well, I just have a couple more questions for you about this, about your experience with Tunic. The first of which, is there like a detail in the game, or like anything about it that you haven't gotten to share that you would like to before we go?
Yes. I think the one thing I haven't mentioned a lot is the like secondary items in the game are really cool. So this would be like in a Zelda game, your boomerang, your hook shot, that type of thing. Because Zelda is such a prominent series, a lot of Zelda-esque games will take those items and have equivalents to them, or like just put a slight spin on them. And the secondary items in Tunic are all very unique and unexpected when you encounter them, and they fill out your moveset in a really cool way. But that was another consistent surprise of I'd be like, how am I going to solve this problem? Oh, that's not at all the shape I thought this tool would take, but it's very, very cool.
I love that.
Yeah.
The more you share about this game, the more I'm like, as being a Zelda head, I'm like, gosh, how have I not dove in yet? Lastly, all I really want to ask you to do is that on our way out, would you mind, as you've kind of been doing for us, just put a bow on the place that this game held for you and sort of wrap up your thoughts?
Yeah. I think the beauty of Tunic for me is the beauty of discovery. And whether that is discovering a puzzle or discovering like a way to beat a boss, but it is an experience that I had that is like purely unique to video games as a medium and their storytelling capabilities that I think is it's a game I fell in love with, but also the day that I figured it out, the fact that I got a job to write about video games was a way for me being like, oh, video games are so valuable because I felt this one. I've never felt so connected to one as I did here. And I think that's why we play games, is for things like this, for these like unique singular moments. And I'm sure if I talked to other people, so I mentioned Jill, she's like the head of the Indie Informer. She was at Game Informer at the time. She gave Tunic a 9.75, which is like almost the highest possible score.
Yeah.
I haven't actually talked to her about her beating the game, but I bet she has a completely different story that would be just as cool. And the fact that a game can facilitate those human experiences, I think, is why I play them.
I love that. Incredible way to wrap that up. I mean, and just to piggyback on that a little bit, it's a lot of the reason why I know I talked to you about one reason I like doing the show, which is connecting with people, but hearing these stories is a reminder of like why contextually a game is special on its own, but in the context of your life, it can mean a whole different thing. So thank you, Charles, for bringing on Tunic to discuss. I just loved hearing all that from you.
Oh, thanks for having me. And yes, it's a great, I mean, a genius podcast premise, which I wouldn't be saying if I wasn't. No, sorry, I would be saying even if I was. My feelings of that are separate from the fact that I'm a guest on the show currently, is the sentence I'm trying to say. I think it's a very good premise and it's just a cool way to see into people's lives. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that. That means a lot to hear from you. From hey, the Puke Master himself. And we won't be coining that nickname. We won't be doing that.
That's my the one English phrase when you encounter me in Tunic. It just says the Puke Master, and I'm like, no, that can't be the one word,
Gosh, that's my thanks that I give to you for guesting on the show today, is giving you an awful nickname like that.
A subtitle.
I love it. Well, before we go, I do have some fun post-show segments prepared for you. The first of which is the Fact Me by Your Game segment. That's just where I normally share a fun fact about the game with the guest today. But kind of like you were, what felt like you had some apprehension to talk about some spoilers in this game. I really didn't want to look up any like Easter eggs, any secrets. So sometimes that's what we find in this section. Really, all I'm going to discuss today is just go into a little bit of the inspiration and the influence for this game, which we've been touching on, for Shouldice making it. So this I have titled Tunic's Countless Inspirations. A lot of this will actually be, the context is pulled from Ki-Hoon Chan's The Gamer article titled Unraveling the Meaning of Tunic. It's a great article. I'll include a link in the show notes as well. Excuse me, but I'll just sort of monologue really quick and then we can discuss everything from the original Legend of Zelda to plenty of other titles. Tunic has countless games that have inspired it. Creator Andrew Shouldice has said over and over how that original title on the NES influenced the game with its open world and discovery-focused nature. Another huge influence is a game we've sort of been talking about a little bit in a series. FromSoft's Bloodborne, of course, influenced the technical combat design with a rhythm of attacking and dodging at a quick pace. The story also drew from that of Bloodborne, and what it says here, what's drawn from the article, is that it used the idea of worlds being corrupted by the exploitation of an ancient power. Of course, context of the game we haven't talked about too much because of the spoilers, but I'm sure that means something to you and somebody else.
Yes.
The one The one influence that I found really surprising that was kind of repeated over and over was Metroid 2: The Return of Samus, which was the Game Boy title. Are you familiar with this? This is the one they remade on the 3DS.
I know of it, but I don't know what differentiates it from the other 2D Metroids.
It's so in the game itself, the difference is that you are hunting 40 Metroids, and that's really the goal of the entire game, is to just knock that number down to 0. As opposed to, and it is a Metroidvania style game with its typical, gates that you can sometimes need an ability to pass through, and other times you can cheese your way through. But the influence that I guess he drew for it, which was the manual. It says that Shouldice was inspired by the sense of mystery he had as a child when reading through many manuals, especially that from Metroid 2, because he wasn't able to understand everything he was reading due to a lack, kind of we were talking about, lack of a reading ability and context as a kid. So
yeah,
we've talked about, the manual over and over in this game, but it was just kind of tickled me that the one that sort of stuck out to him as the influence was at least his memory of the Metroid 2 manual. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to say on the heels of that. I was kind of just presenting that to you.
No, I definitely get that. And that's, honestly, that is a game, from what I know about it, that would not necessitate you. It's a game where you would get a lot more from reading the manual than just playing it outright. Like, it's very much of that era where you would read it and be like, oh, I didn't realize that's everything that was happening. Because those are Metroid games are pretty low on text and exposition in the first place.
Yeah, even as the series continues, like even Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo, plenty of context. You either are filling in yourself or would have to have a manual to do so. But in the original 2 games, for the NES and the Game Boy especially, that's pretty much it for the Fact Me By Your Game segment. And I'll lead us into the final one, the game recommendations. And Charles, this segment is my forced tie-in to the movie Call Me By Your Name, where I am going to treat Tunic like your passionate summer fling in Italy. Unfortunately, it's not going to work out. So in order to help you get over this heartbreak, I've got 3 potential new flings that all have something in common with Tunic. Are you ready to get back out there?
Arrivederci, Tunic.
Arrivederci. You're already on the right path. So I've got 3 for you today. The first of which is if you are longing for another game that also had a little influence in the visual design of Tunic and has some of the just the strength in its puzzle discovery nature, I'll recommend to you a game called Monument Valley. Do you know this game at all?
I do know this game.
This is strangely, this is one where a guest flipped it on me on her episode like 3 years ago and was like, here's a recommendation for you. But for any listener out there who hasn't played it, it's a really, I found it to be a really fun and a game that gives such a splendid sense of discovery as you're solving puzzles. But it's the very similar like isometric view where I think as I was learning about Tunic, sometimes there's more than meets the eye, or just the angle you're looking at may not be revealing, I'll just say, a secret or something like that. So your first one is Monument Valley. The second one is if you'd like a spiritual sibling to Tunic that holds your hand just slightly more, I'll give you a game that I've actually played, Death's Door.
Yes.
Have you played through this one at all?
I haven't finished it, but I think they came out around similar times.
Yeah, it was just the year before.
Okay, yeah.
They're so strikingly similar. Both the isometric view, you're controlling a different animal in a an action combat sense. But I loved this game when I played through it, and I think Tunic is sort of feels like the next step, just with a little less given to you.
I remember playing Death's Door before Tunic, and remember being considering not picking up Tunic because I liked Death's Door so much, and I was like, it's probably not going to be as good. And then, changed my life.
Yeah, and here we are. Well, lastly, for you, Charles, is if stepping away from Tunic and getting into, as I'm just describing, a new relationship with the game, if you actually are looking for a completely different change of pace, and instead of leaving so much up to your discovery and obscurity, you want a game that's going to hold your hand to the extreme, then I'll recommend none other than The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. You were a wee kid. Did you play Skyward Sword?
Oh, it's for sure on the shelf behind me somewhere.
Yes.
Yes, I like that game a lot. I particularly like the soundtrack for that game. It's a very strong one.
Yeah, one of the best ones. This is like, as much as I'm making fun of it a little bit here as the final goof recommendation, I do really enjoy this game. And when I finished it back in, like, you know, right after Christmas 2011, I was convinced it was my favorite game of all time, which shows you how much of a prisoner of the moment I can be. And also, this game it's got plenty of strengths. Anyway, to wrap up your recommendations, we have Monument Valley, Death's Door, and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. And that'll bring us to the end of those and will actually lead us to the conclusion of the show. So I know I kind of already said it when we finished our discussion, but Charles, thanks so much for bringing Tunic on. This was so much fun to get to chat with you and know you better today.
Yeah, I was very excited. I don't think I've ever gotten the chance to tell this story in this much depth publicly. Yeah. So I was very, very glad to do it.
I love it. Well, on your way out today, I know we plugged some stuff a little bit up top, but what do you want to plug for the listener? Where should they find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can follow me basically anywhere at ChuckDuck365. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. And then you can catch me on MinnMax. I'm on the MinnMax show sometimes. You'll find me on New Show Plus sometimes. If you like improv, you're interested in D&D stuff, I did a one-shot over there. We've done some other tabletop things. And then, of course, my travelogue. And then you can also find me on the Indie Informer, which is a Game Informer-esque type site, but just for indie games. And I recently played a game called Beastie Ball.
Oh, I haven't heard of that.
It is an indie game. It's made by the people that made Wander Song and Chicory. Okay. And it is like Pokemon, but if the Pokemon played this like volleyball type game.
Okay. And
it is so good. I was like, I was expecting to go in and be like, yeah, it's a pretty good like Pokemon clone, and now I'm kind of like, this might be in my top 10 this year when it comes.
Whoa.
It's very, very good.
I love it. Well, thanks for plugging all that. I'll be sure to include a link in the show notes to everything that we just threw out. And I'll go ahead and just close this out with some plugs of my own. The show art for Call Me By Your Game is done by the artist Glenn J. You can find him and his other great work on Instagram at glenn.jay. The show is produced, edited, and the original music that you hear throughout is done by Jeremy Schmidt. If you want to thank him for the wonderful work he puts in to this podcast, you should check out his show, Video Games, a Comedy Show, wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow the show all over social media on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. You can also follow us, the network, Super NPC Radio, all over the place too, including our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Super NPC Radio. I'm on the socials, including Twitch as well. If you want to follow me, there's links in the show notes. And then if you're still listening at this point and you like the conversations that I have with people about video games, you should check out our Patreon over at patreon.com/Super NPC Radio. We have a ton of bonus video game podcasts at different tiers for you. So if you want to hear more conversations with me and other people, I do a bonus episode of this podcast every month, the Co-op series, where I bring a group of people together to do more of an overview podcast on one video game. And most recently, the episode that we covered was, the game we covered was Psychonauts 2. Coming up for the month of October, we've got Uncharted 2. It's a theme of sequels this year, up to my discretion. And yeah, so there's stuff like that. There's our Games Club series, which we're going through Death Stranding right now, which despite how much that game tries to make me not like it, I absolutely love Death Stranding. I've been corrupted by it. But anyway, all that is on our Patreon. But again, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Call Me By Your Game. We will see you on the next one.